Let us examine our ways and test them. Joy is gone from our hearts. Our dancing has turned to mourning. The crown has fallen from our head. The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The oracles they gave you were false and misleading. How deserted lies the city of Jerusalem, once so full of people. Among her lovers there is none to comfort her. Her foes have become her masters. Her enemies are at ease. Her filthiness clung to her skirts. She did not consider her future. A few paupers who could be of no help in Babylon and no threat in Judah were allowed to remain in the land, under the supervision of Gedaliah, a man of Judah whom Nebuchadnezzar appointed as governor of the land. The fall of Jerusalem was the most severe crisis the people of God had ever faced in their long history. The land God had promised to Abraham hundreds of years before had been taken from them. The holy city of King David lay in ruins. Yahweh's own temple was but a heap of rubble. Jeremiah held forth a vision of hope beyond the tragedy. The heart of this vision of hope was a new house of Israel, and the cornerstone of this new house would be a new covenant, a new testament between God and man. The covenant which Jeremiah spoke of would be a gift of God's grace, to which men would respond in grateful trust. But the demands of the new covenant would not be written upon tablets of stone. It would be written upon the hearts of men. Because the book of Obadiah is so short, it is fairly easy to grasp the full range of Obadiah's prophecies. Obadiah spoke of judgment and hope, and like most of the other biblical prophets, his words had both immediate and long-term effects. Obadiah's first audience, his contemporaries, received comfort from his prophecies as they heard that Edom, their bitter enemy and distant kinsman, would be punished for aiding in Judah's defeat. The pride of your heart has deceived you, Edom, you who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights. The land of Edom was the land which was given to Esau, Jacob's older twin brother, by God. The word Edom comes from a word which means to be red. Esau's skin was reddish in color. Esau's fatal flaw was that he failed to understand the difference between what was holy and what was not. After a difficult and disappointing hunting trip, a famished Esau traded his birthright for some food. This was a shameful disregard for the precious family birthright, which in this family bore eternal weight, demonstrating that in Esau's mind, the here and now held equal or greater importance than eternal matters. Like their progenitor Esau, the Edomites could not distinguish between the holy and the ordinary. Along with the Moabites and Ammonites, they maintained that Israel was no different from any other nation on earth. The Edomite people were prideful. God considered the boasts of the Edomites to be boasts against him personally. The Edomites were also noted for their willingness to hold a grudge until death. We mentioned from 1 Kings chapter 11 that one of David and Solomon's most troublesome enemies was an Edomite of royal lineage named Hadad. He had fled from King David to Egypt, where he enjoyed political asylum, even marrying Pharaoh's sister-in-law. Upon hearing of David's death, however, he returned to his homeland to fight Israel for Edom's independence. The brutal hatred which existed between Israel and Edom did not reach its greatest intensity until after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. In the day that the Babylonian army ransacked Jerusalem and marched its worn and weary inhabitants in chains away from their homeland, the Edomites, cheering the heathen invaders, shouted, raze it, even to its foundations." Rejoicing in the utter destruction of their old adversary, all the while boasting of their own security. The prime motivation for their joy was that they envied the Jews because of the land given to them by God. They saw the destruction and captivity of both Israel and Judah, fully expecting to possess the abandoned territories. God also condemned Edom for staring at their naked and disgraced kinsmen as they were led away captive, actually entering the burning city to help themselves to the spoils which the Babylonians had left behind. They also placed guards at certain crossroads and captured or killed those Jews who had managed to escape the carnage, and had an agreement with both the Philistines and Tyre that if any Jew escaped to their country, they would take them captive and ship them to Edom. The poor among the Jews were mercifully left behind by the conquering Babylonians to tend the empty fields of Judah, but they were in constant danger of Edomite attack. As Amos put it, Edom pursued his brother with the sword, cast off all pity, and held perpetual anger against them. The prophet Isaiah describes the total desolation which God would visit upon Edom for its hostility toward God's people. Among the descriptions of God's wrath is the sole reference in Scripture to a well-known Mesopotamian demon named Lilith. Later Jewish tradition connected the name Lilith with the Hebrew word for night, giving the traditional English translation night creature. However, as a Mesopotamian name, Lilith comes from the Sumerian word Lilu, meaning wind or spirit. The earliest records and amulets from Mesopotamia show that people there feared the Lilu, a group of particularly malevolent demons. Lilith herself was believed to attack both babies and mothers in childbirth, eating their flesh and sucking their blood. The only protection from the Lilu was to call upon the king of demons for help. Jewish inscriptions and amulets describe Lilith in a similar fashion. but with additional features. She was known as a woman with long hair and wings, attacking men who slept alone. Jewish incantation bowls have been found which petition God to defeat and bind Lilith as she seeks her human prey. For Isaiah's listeners, the threat of Lilith finding a place to rest amongst humans was nothing but terrifying. Where once the Edomite cities housed wisdom and life and cultured society, there would now be wasteland. Edom would become uninhabitable, the domain of wild animals and wild beasts. The nobility that once led the land would be gone. No human would dare to dwell in the area, for Lilith ensures its perpetual desolation. Petra, within Edom, is about 130 miles southeast of Jerusalem. Petra was once the stronghold of the Edomites, and later the capital city of the Arab Nabateans. Today its ruins feature amazing buildings carved into the rock cliffs. Jesus had once said, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, for then there will be great tribulation." Matthew chapter 24. According to both the Jewish historian Josephus and early church historian Eusebius, the Christian Jews fled to Petra, or Edom, sometime during the years of 66 to 70 AD, when the Romans razed the city of Jerusalem and the temple. The command to the inhabitants of Jerusalem was clear: flee to the mountains. The mountains in Israel are not very high, the highest being around 1,200 meters, and do not offer safe refuge to a large group of people. At Petra, however, the mountains are consistently about 1,500 meters high, being the highest in modern Jordan. They are of the most rugged and inaccessible mountain ranges in the world. Based on scripture and history, what better location for people to be safe from attack? The city has an excellent defensive structure, it is mountainous, and the main entrance is a long, narrow rock wall called the Sick. The Sick, in Arabic al-Sick, meaning the shaft, is the main entrance to the ancient Edomite city of Petra in southern Jordan. Also known as Sikket, it is a dim, narrow gorge, at some points no more than 10 feet wide, and winds its way approximately 3/4 of a mile, and ends at Petra's most elaborate ruin, Al-Khazneh, or the Treasury. Along the Sick are underground chambers, the function of which has yet to be determined. At a reasonable pace, it takes around 30 minutes to walk from the entrance of the Sick to the Treasury. The book of Daniel is one of the most intriguing books of the Bible. Much of Daniel records fantastic and highly symbolic visions, which must be carefully interpreted in light of other biblical teachings and world events, past and future. By the time of Daniel, the great Assyrian period of world domination had already passed. Daniel was brought to the king in order to interpret his troubling dream. Daniel explained that Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great statue outlined a sweeping overview of prophetic world history. The five-part statue was made of dissimilar and progressively inferior materials. Each section represented an empire, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him." Daniel chapter 2. It has been many centuries since the first four of these empires have risen and fallen. Although each ensuing empire seemed to absorb much of the ideology of the previous empire, and remnants of their cultures are still in existence today. Those which have fallen are the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and the Roman empires. A final 10-nation confederation, represented by the feet and toes of the statue, led by a most unholy tyrant, represents a future alliance, a final attempt at a one-world, government-ruling totalitarian regime. Finally, a great rock, cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, strikes the statue, toppling it and breaking it into pieces. The stone is cut out by the God of heaven, who will establish an everlasting kingdom through his Son, Jesus Christ, one marked by righteousness and peace. Daniel was promoted by the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, as ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Chapter 2, verse 48. The faithfulness of Daniel's friends is also tested. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Daniel was promoted to a chief over the Chaldeans of Babylon because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. Daniel chapter 5, verses 11 and 12. God had blessed him and his Jewish friends greatly in light of the faith that they had displayed in the face of adversity. Now, looking forward, Daniel has now been living in Babylon for nearly 20 years, having been taken to Babylon in the year of 605 BC during the first of 3 Babylonian attacks on Judah. Chapter 7. Daniel's vision of 4 beasts, representing the same successive superpowers illustrated in Nebuchadnezzar's dream of chapter 2. However, in Daniel's vision, greater details and more revealing characteristics about each of these world empires are revealed. Chapter 8. Daniel is taken, in a vision, from Babylon to Susa, one of the major cities of Persia. He is shown a powerful ram with 2 horns, representing Media-Persia, being attacked and defeated by a ferocious goat, representing Greece, with a prominent horn, representing Alexander the Great, between its eyes. This prophecy represents the second, Media-Persia, and the third, Greece, great empires of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar of chapter 2 and the vision of Daniel chapter 7. The prominent horn of the ferocious goat is broken off, and in its place 4 more prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Verse 8. This prophecy would represent Alexander's 4 generals, who divided up his kingdom upon his death. Control of the land of Palestine would be a battleground for the Ptolemies and Seleucids for nearly 125 years. While the first 8 verses of Daniel chapter 8 refers to the Greek or Grecian kingdom, the third of the great empires, the final 19 verses shift to the description of a little horn, which comes out of one of the 4 prominent horns, the 4 generals of Alexander. An oppressor would come, one who attempts to set himself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord. This portion of the vision has a dual fulfillment. Out of the Seleucid Empire would come a ruler, Antiochus Epiphanes, who would seek to destroy any attempts of Jewish worship, other than that directed toward himself. Antiochus would rise up against Jerusalem in an act of rage against the Jews in the 2nd century BC. However, there seems to be a greater implication to these 19 verses, the time of the end. The rule of this tyrant would serve to be a type or a picture of a more ruthless ruler of a more distant time. The description vividly correlates with several Revelation passages describing the end times Antichrist. Thus, even more importantly, These passages seem to be a description of the man-beast, the future man of sin. Chapter 10 is Daniel's vision of a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold around his waist, with a body like topaz, his face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, arms and legs like the gleam of burnished or highly polished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. He is coming to Daniel to explain to him what will happen to his people, the Jewish people, in the future, which is recorded in chapter 11. Like chapter 8, Daniel chapter 11 also describes a madman. We will call this man the beast man. Chapter 8 described the man-beast. The first 20 verses provide an amazingly accurate, historically confirmed, detailed prophecy of the interaction between the Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt, and the Seleucids, who ruled Syria, which were the two dominating divisions of the Grecian kingdom, two prevailing generals of Alexander's armies. The prophecies are so insightful and accurate that secular sources have stated that there was no possibility that the book of Daniel could have been written in the days of the Babylonian captivity. Verses 21 through 45 asserts that a usurper king, a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given, will obtain the kingdom. With amazing accuracy, this description again views the diabolical actions of Antiochus Epiphanes, taking a more detailed look at his evil actions against the Jews. Like chapter 8, which describes the Antichrist with allusion toward Epiphanes, chapter 11 details the actions of Epiphanes, but also implying the acts of the future Antichrist, the man-beast. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. The prophecies of Daniel are notable and of great importance. Soon, within 45 years, they will begin to be fulfilled. For now, let's return to Babylon under the control of King Nebuchadnezzar during Daniel's 20th year of captivity. When we think of the new Babylonian Empire, we automatically think of Nebuchadnezzar. This is as it should be, for this great empire was far more than most, a one-man show. It had been brought into existence by Nebuchadnezzar and his father Nabopolassar. It reached its peak under Nebuchadnezzar. His efforts to develop Babylon made it one of the wonders of the ancient world. He dug canals, lined a portion of the Euphrates with brick, surrounded Babylon with a moat, erected a strong fortress, built new temples to Babylon's gods, and constructed the famous hanging gardens to please his wife Amytis, a Median princess who had grown lonely for the fruits and flowers of her homeland. When Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Assyrians in 612 BC, he was aided by Cyrus, king of Media. 20 years later, Media loomed as Babylon's most serious rival in the quest for world domination. At the same time that Nebuchadnezzar was attempting to keep his holdings within Mesopotamia, Syria, and Palestine in line, a tiring and cumbersome task, Cyrus was building an enormous empire with its capital in Ecbatana. By 585 BC, he had extended his holdings into Asia Minor and was putting heavy pressure on Lydia. Because of his marriage to the Median king's daughter, Nebuchadnezzar enjoyed a distinct advantage over other Near Eastern nations in that he was in little immediate danger of attack. Still, he was uneasy about what might happen if Cyrus' expansion efforts were allowed to continue unchecked. He used his influence and perhaps a little pressure to arrange a truce between Media and Lydia and to set the eastern limit of the Median Empire at the Halys River. Nebuchadnezzar laid siege to Tyre in 585 BC, but the stubborn little nation managed to hold him off for 13 years before finally submitting to Babylon in 572. Babylon's religion involved not only sacrifice to idols and trust in astrology, but also contained an incredible degree of self-reliance and arrogance. Isaiah chapter 47 records, "You said, I will continue forever, the eternal queen." Verse 7. Lounging in your security, you said to yourself, I am, and there is none besides me. Verse 8. Babylonian magicians cast potent spells and involved themselves in sorcery. Verse 9 and 12. They trusted in their own wickedness. They believed it would never be noticed. Verse 10. They involved themselves in astrology, gazing at the stars. Verse 13. Their own wisdom and knowledge misled them. Verse 10 and 13. Unseen disaster will come upon them. Verse 11. When disaster comes upon them, they will not know how to conjure it away. Verse 11. They will not be able to purchase protection. Verse 11. Claiming for herself the status of God, she would be suddenly desolated and destroyed. Verses 9 through 11. Their magicians and soothsayers are all like stubble. The fire will burn them up. They cannot even save themselves from the power of the flame. Verse 14. There is no one that can save you. Verse 15. Luke chapter 12, verses 16 through 21 in the New Testament records, And he told them a parable, saying, The land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, You fool, this very night your soul is required of you. And now, who will own what you have prepared? So this is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The king of Babylon said, Is this not great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, for the glory of my majesty? Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. Nebuchadnezzar's hair grew like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC. Almost immediately, Babylon started into a tailspin. Nebuchadnezzar's son, Marduk, Evil Merodach in the Bible, succeeded his father to the throne. Evil Merodach of Babylon releases Jehoiakim. After the brief reigns of several kings, Nabonidus, a prince of Haran, located in the northern part of the empire, became the king of Babylon. Nabonidus was a strange character with little regard for public relations. The chief god of Babylon, Marduk, was rejected for the god of his native Haran, Sin, the moon god. This stirred up a great deal of resentment toward Nabonidus from the priests and the people of Babylon. Nabonidus did not seem to care much for what they thought. He made his headquarters in northwest Mesopotamia, leaving his son Belshazzar in charge of the affairs of Babylon. Belshazzar did not bother himself to arrange for the celebration of the New Year, the chief holiday in Babylon. This was a serious social and political blunder. The people of Babylon resented him so bitterly when the Persian army defeated him in 539 BC. The Persians were hailed as liberators rather than conquerors. While Nabonidus was raising the ire of the people of his empire, one of the most important developments in the history of the world was taking place in Media. The rise of Cyrus the Persian. Cyrus was a vassal ruler in what is now southern Iran. In 559 BC, he engineered a revolt against Astyages, whom had succeeded his father Cyrus to the Median throne in 585 BC. Within 3 years, Cyrus had stormed Ecbatana, driven Astyages from the capital, and placed himself atop the vast Median Empire. Then he initiated a program of conquest that eventually placed him atop the world. We have discussed the beginnings of Rome around 753 BC and the expansion of Grecian culture also in the 8th century BC. For the sake of relating global historical timing, we don't often consider other important events which took place outside of our biblical history. We don't often think about Far Eastern developments as occurring simultaneously with the beginnings of the great Persian Empire in the 6th century BC. The Far East was also experiencing a period of great unrest. Historically, during periods of uneasiness, false teachers are able to acquire a following of disciples. China was no different. Kung Fu was able to define a pattern of correct behaviors. The purpose was to achieve a just and peaceful society, that the necessary first step is within each individual. He laid constant emphasis on 2 forms of harmony, music and ritual, which would lead to a harmonious society. Today, we know Kung Fu as Confucius, who was born in 551 BC in the Chinese state of Lu. Buddhism from the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, 560 to 482 BC. At the age of 29, Siddhartha ventured out into the real world. In a single day, he encountered a sick man, an old pauper, and a dead man. This affected him deeply, and he decided to give up his wealthy but useless existence and search for the true meaning of life. It is said that he found the enlightenment that he had been seeking and understood the riddle and source of suffering. He did not claim to be a god, but after his death, his followers formed a new religion to worship him and to spread the ideas. Cyrus the Great becomes ruler and founder of the Achaemenid dynasty of Persia. A prophecy from 706 BC, recorded in Isaiah 44, verse 28. I am the Lord who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid. Chapter 45, verse 1 records, this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut through bars of iron. I will give you hidden treasures, riches stored in secret places, so that you may know that I am the Lord, the God of Israel, who summons you by name. For the sake of Jacob, my servant, of Israel, my chosen, I summon you, Cyrus, by name, and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. I will strengthen you, though you have not acknowledged me. I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. Woe to those who quarrel with their maker. Does the clay say to the potter, what are you making? It is I who made the earth and created mankind on it. My own hand stretched out the heavens. I marshaled their starry hosts. I will rise up, Cyrus, in my righteousness. I will make all his ways straight. He will rebuild my city and set my exiles free, but not for a price or reward, says the Lord Almighty. When Nabonidus of Babylon saw that the hungry Median giant was again on the prowl, he quickly formed a military alliance with Lydia and Egypt. But the determined giant was hard to stop. By 546, Cyrus had marched deep into Asia Minor, scooping most of northern Babylon and Lydia into its net. With characteristic prudence, Egypt decided to back down on her obligations and left Babylon to fend for herself. Cyrus and his armies were gaining strength. Long before he captured Babylon, the prophet Isaiah had proclaimed that Babylon and her gods were doomed. Bel and Nebo, two important Babylonian gods, would themselves be taken into captivity, recorded in Isaiah chapter 49. It was common in the ancient Near East to see wars between nations as wars between those nations' respective gods. Thus, Babylon's victory over Assyria would have been considered a victory for Babylon's gods, and the approach of Cyrus as a challenge by Persia's deities. Whether he knows it or not, Cyrus is sent by the one true God, the God of Israel. Moreover, Babylon's gods will be humiliated, not because they are weaker than another nation's gods, but because they are mere idols. Gods that can be carried on cattle or on one's shoulders are no gods at all. An archaeological note. Until 1853, no mention of Belshazzar was found in Babylonian records. Nabonidus was thought to have been the last king of Babylon. To the critics, this was one of the evidences that the book of Daniel was not historical. But in 1853, an inscription was found in the corner of a temple built by Nabonidus in Ur to a god, which reads, "May I, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, not sin against thee, and may reverence for thee dwell in the heart of Belshazzar, my firstborn favorite son." From other inscriptions, it has been learned that Nabonidus, much of the time, was in retirement outside of Babylon, and that Belshazzar was in control of the army and the government, co-regent with his father, and that it was he who was defeated by Cyrus. This explains how Daniel could be third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. Darius the Mede was a military expert and an administrative genius. He was noted for his expertise in building projects. He was similar to a governor, ruling as the representative of the king, or sovereign. He was likely the military general who captured Babylon for Cyrus, king of Persia. Darius I, Darius meaning Lord, would later become king of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, successor to Cyrus's son, Cambyses. Discovered in 1879, in the ruins of Babylon by archaeologist Hormuzd Rassam. This baked cylinder, measuring 9 inches by 4 inches, known as the Cyrus cylinder, is inscribed in cuneiform script in the Akkadian language. Today, it is also located at the British Museum in London. When I entered Babylon and took up my royal abode in the palace of the princes, amid acclamation and shouts of joy, the mighty Lord Marduk inclined the great hearts of the Babylonians towards me. I liberated those who dwelt in Babylon from the yoke that chafed them. I am Cyrus, king of all things, the great king, king of all the earth. So runs the inscription in Babylonian characters on the clay cylinder of Cyrus. In 539 BC, a year after Cyrus had defeated the army of Nabonidus, the Babylonian king, the occupation of Babylon by the Persians settled the fate of the last great empire of Mesopotamia. The time had come of which it was said, "After 70 years be accomplished at Babylon, I will visit you, in causing you to return to this place." In Isaiah chapter 45, verse 1, the prophet said God would open the gates of Babylon for Cyrus and his attacking army. Despite Babylon's remarkable defenses, which included moats and walls that were more than 70 feet thick and 300 feet high, and 250 watchtowers, Darius was able to enter the city and conquer it. Darius and his troops diverted the flow of the Euphrates River into a large lake basin. He then was able to march his army across the riverbed and into the city. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 23 records the prophet saying that Babylon, which had been a world power at 2 different times in history, would be brought to a humble and final end. It would be reduced to swampland. After Cyrus conquered Babylon in 539 BC, the kingdom never again rose to power. The buildings of Babylon fell into a gradual state of ruin during the next several centuries. Archaeologists excavated Babylon during the 1800s. Some parts of the city would not be dug up because they were under a water table that had risen over the centuries. About 300 miles southeast of the Persian Empire's winter capital at Susa lies the ruins of the Stairway of the Great Audience Hall at Persepolis. This palace complex was built as the official headquarters of the king. Above the stairway are remains of the tall, slender columns from the Hall of 100 Columns. The complex stood until 330 BC, when Alexander the Great conquered the Persians and razed it. As impressive as their military deeds were, of more lasting significance was the Persian philosophy of government. They strove for peaceful coexistence among the nations of the empire through a policy of toleration.